Chapter 10 focuses on the gas laws. It's the last chapter we're going to cover of this semester, and this will be the last material that will show up on the final exam on Thursday. So today, Chapter 10 material, this will be available on a PlayPosit module. Wednesday, we'll do a live review of the practice exam that I posted on Blackboard. And then on Thursday, the final exam, it's 100 points. It's 20% of your course grade. It'll be open for 24 hours. I'll provide any equation, any conversion factor you would need to know for the exam, as well as a periodic table of the elements. And then on Friday, the chemistry in your life assignment is due by midnight. That file should be saved as a PowerPoint file, if that's what you're using, and emailed to me by midnight. The course survey is open as well, so please take a few minutes to fill out the course survey through Syracuse University. I take into consideration the results. I read the results every year and think about those when I'm putting together the material, and every year when I have my annual review. The university also looks at those course evaluations. So I read your feedback, and the university reads your feedback as well and takes it into consideration every year for my evaluation. So please take a few minutes to fill out that survey if you haven't done so already about this summer session class, especially this summer session because a lot's changed. A lot of material has been presented in different formats. We've used a lot of different technology, so any of that feedback is greatly appreciated as I try to learn more about the best practices for an online class like this, what works, what doesn't work. So please take a few minutes and fill out that survey. So for gases, right, gases are a little bit different than the other phases that we've talked about. We've worked with liquids and solids a lot. We've worked with the density. We've looked at boiling points and melting points. The one thing that's unique about gases as opposed to liquids and solids are that gases are highly compressible. They are highly susceptible to changes in volume through increase in pressure or changes in temperature as well. And so when we're talking about gases, we don't usually talk about them in terms of mass or volume like we talk about liquids or solids, but we do talk about them in terms of a pressure. And that's just how much force, right, is represented over a certain area. And that's caused by the sample of gas molecules, all the molecules in that sample, how fast are they moving, and how hard are they hitting the boundaries of their container. And we measure that often in chemistry, we'll measure that in ATM, atmospheres, or you'll see millimeters of mercury. Other terms of pressure that you're probably familiar with are something like PSI, right? If you're measuring the pressure of a bike tire or of a basketball, you're probably measuring that in pounds per square inch, or PSI. But in chemistry, we're going to talk about atmospheres or millimeters of mercury, where your standard pressure is 1 ATM, or approximately 760 millimeters of mercury. And so where does that pressure come from? So whether you know it or not, a giant column of air is resting on your head. The giant column of air that goes from the upper reaches of our atmosphere all the way down to the surface of the earth where we're standing. Every day we're walking around, we're carrying that giant column of air pressing down on our head and our shoulders. That is atmospheric pressure. We don't feel that pressure because we've been experiencing it in our entire life, and so it's there even though we don't feel that weight. But that weight's what comes to approximately 14.2 psi. So for every square inch of your body, you're carrying 14.2 pounds, right, of that atmospheric pressure. Something interesting to think about, right, that we're carrying that weight of air around every day. We can measure that pressure using an apparatus known as a barometer, where early barometers used mercury because mercury was a liquid and it was very dense. And so how a barometer works is we have our atmospheric pressure that's pressing down on this surface, in this case a surface of mercury, and that pressure that's exerted by the atmosphere forces the mercury up into this capillary. And because mercury was the first liquid used to test the atmospheric pressure, it was measured that the atmospheric pressure was able to push mercury 760 millimeters up this capillary. hence our first term for atmospheric pressure of 760 millimeters of mercury. It was literally, we were measuring 760 millimeters of mercury up this capillary tube. That equals the atmospheric pressure, right? Think of the weight of the mercury in that tube, the gravitational forces on that mercury in that tube. That equals the atmospheric pressure that the atmosphere is exerting on this mercury. At the start, I talked about how gases are influenced by changes in pressure and temperature, right? Things that we're all familiar with, whether or not we know the names of the laws that are applying when we're talking about temperature and pressure changes of a gas. And so the first gas law is known as Boyles Law, and it relates pressure and volume. So if we were to take a balloon at the surface of the Earth's atmosphere and release that balloon would rise through the atmosphere, and as we rise through the atmosphere, our pressure decreases. As the pressure goes down, the volume of that balloon increases. So volume and pressure are inversely proportional. Boyles' law demonstrates the inverse relationship between pressure and volume. And we can see that mathematically, right? Pressure times volume of our final system equals the pressure times the volume of our initial system. So that needs to be an inverse relationship. As volume increases, right, my pressure would need to decrease. As my pressure increases, the volume would decrease. As volume increases, right, pressure decreases. So everything else being constant, right, number of moles and temperature remaining constant, our volume is inversely proportional to the pressure. And here's Boyle's original experiment, right? I could take a piston. I have this piston at 0.5 atm, and it occupies 1.4 liters of volume. I double the pressure, so I take it from 0.5 atm, and I increase the pressure to 1 atm. What happens to the volume? I cut the volume in half, right? They're inversely related. I double the pressure, I cut the volume in half. I could take this experiment in the opposite direction, right? I could expand this cylinder going from 0.75 liters to 1.4 liters, and I'd expect the atmospheric pressure to decrease, to go from 1 atm to 0.5 atm. The other empirical law that we're familiar with, whether we know the name or not, is Charles' Law. And Charles' Law relates temperature to volume. As I take a balloon and I heat that balloon up, right, the volume of that balloon increases. So here we have a direct relationship between volume and temperature, as represented in Charles' Law. So a direct relationship between volume and temperature. As the temperature increases of a gas increases, so does the volume. And the opposite would also be true. If I were to take that same balloon and cool that balloon down, the volume of that balloon would decrease. And again, this is at constant number of moles and constant pressure. So I'm not changing how many moles are in the sample. I'm not changing the pressure of the sample. All I'm doing is changing the temperature of the sample. So again, it's a direct relationship. Temperature increases, volume increases. As I heat something up, it expands. As I cool something down, it contracts. And so here's that experiment again. Here I have my piston at 100 Kelvin, and I heat that piston up from 100 to 200 Kelvin. And what do I see happens to the volume? The volume goes from 0.26 liters to 0.52 liters. So I've doubled the volume by doubling the temperature. And again, pressure remains constant. So I keep a constant pressure. All I'm doing is changing the temperature, and I'm able to see an increase in volume of that sample. So again, a direct relationship. I increase temperature, I increase the volume of that sample. A similar law is Gay-Lussac's law, where it talks about pressure and temperature relationships, right? It's very similar to the previous law that we were looking at, Charles' law, right? The pressure exerted by a gas at constant temperature is directly proportional to its absolute temperature. So again, as I have an increase in temperature, I would expect to have an increase in pressure on that sample. Or if I have a decrease in temperature, I expect to have a decrease in pressure of that sample. Where now we're keeping the number of moles and the volume of that sample constant. The only reason I introduce Gay-Lussac's law is so we can talk about examples of where this applies. And so if you're a fan of football, you're probably familiar with Deflategate. So January 2015, AFC Championship game, so the game that decides who plays in the Super Bowl. New England Patriots were facing the Indianapolis Colts. It was a very cold game. It was 45 and raining. And so you could imagine, right, football being a game where you need to maintain possession of the football, you need to be able to catch the football easily, hold on to the football, that on a cold and rainy day, it's probably very hard to maintain possession of that ball. So just before halftime, Tom Brady threw an interception, and it was recovered by an Indianapolis Colts defensive player. As he was holding the ball, he realized that something didn't feel quite right? It felt a little bit off. It felt a little bit softer than it should have been. And so fortunately, right, the NFL has a rule for just about everything. Well, they have a rule for this as well. The NFL requires a minimum pressure of 12.5 psi in each ball before the game. So each ball should be filled to a minimum of 12.5 pounds per square inch before the game begins. So let's take a look at some of the data that was collected out of this. So if you take a look at the video of how the pressure is determined in each of these balls, we're just going to make some assumptions because, again, as scientists, we like to record data. As NFL refs, they are not so great on recording data. So we're just going to say that the balls were filled in a locker room that was approximately 75 degrees, and this calculation is done in Kelvin, so we need to convert that to absolute temperature of 297. And the other thing we're going to look at is in the NFL report of this Deflategate issue, they focused on total pressure a lot, and they talked about gauge pressure. And so all that is gauge pressure is the pressure beyond atmospheric pressure. So we're going to come up with a total pressure that those balls all should have been at the start of the game. So if the ball was inflated to 12.5 psi and the atmospheric pressure was 14.7 psi, and again, we're going to assume that was the pressure because, again, none of this was recorded, the total pressure at the start of the game for the balls should have been 27.2 psi. So it was 45 degrees at halftime. Given Gay-Lussac's law, right, we're not going to change the volume of these footballs, but we can change the pressure by changing the temperature. So you would think that at halftime, if the balls went from 75 degrees to 45 degrees, they should have a lower pressure. They should be less than 12.5 psi. But how low should they go? What is the lowest possible pressure of these footballs based on how we know gases behave over different temperature ranges? So here's my initial pressure and temperature, and I can find my final pressure. The final pressure should be nothing less than 25.7 psi. So if my atmospheric pressure, right, was 14.7, 25.7 minus 14.7, I shouldn't have a ball pressure below 11 psi. And yet, here are the ball pressures that were recorded for the Patriots balls at halftime. Got one at 11.5, that's fine. 10.8, that's a little bit low. 10.7, that's also pretty low. 10.9, 10.5, and 10.9. So we'll see that we have 5 footballs that are below 11 psi. And based on how we know that these should behave, right, as temperature decreases, yes, the pressure should decrease, but based on the temperature change that was recorded during this football game, the pressure should not have fallen below 11 psi. And then the other issue with this data as well was all of these 11 footballs were taken into a locker room and their pressure was recorded at halftime. One important variable here is that locker room was a lot warmer than the field was. It wasn't 45 degrees, right? That locker room was probably 70 degrees. So the temperature of ball 1 was probably quite a bit lower than the temperature of ball 11, just because it probably took them 10 or 15 minutes to measure the pressure of each of these balls, something that wasn't taken into consideration, again, when they were collecting this data. So I worked through this exercise not just to point out that I think someone is right or wrong in this issue of the ball pressure, but just to point out that a lot was made of this, right? Deflategate was a huge deal, huge multi-million-dollar investigation, but coming back to it, it's really hard to say when you collect bad data, right? It's really hard to do good calculations and good science when you collect bad data. There are a lot of holes in this data because we didn't really record accurately the atmospheric pressure at the start or at halftime. We didn't record the temperature of each of the balls at halftime when they were measuring the pressure. Right, so there's a lot of gaps in this data. That being said, right, it still does seem a little suspicious that nothing should be below 11 psi, and yet we've recorded 5 of these balls below that threshold.